Alrighty, it's 6:35, so I will go ahead and get started. Just so you guys know, I do have a section at the end for questions, but if at any point anybody has questions and you want to go ahead and throw them in the chat, you can do that and I'll just look at them all at the end and see what we've got. But if you want to wait till the end, that's great too. Also let me know if for some reason, sound goes off or anything like that. Feel free to let me know in the chat. But we'll go ahead and get started. So first of all, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Emma Lashley, and I am the newest member of the Crawfordsville Library reference staff. So you guys are kind of my guinea pigs today as we get started with my first ever program. So thank you guys so much for coming. So a bit about my background and why I'm interested in this topic. I studied anthropology and classical studies at Purdue. And basically what that means is my interest area is archaeology. So I'm really interested in the past and digging up the past. Really specifically, I've studied a lot about classical time period, which means kind of Greek, Roman, a little bit of Egyptian stuff, and some medieval stuff. So I went and did a field school in Ireland where I excavated a medieval castle, and I really enjoyed that, and I think that's the direction I'd like to go in the future with my research. However, I'm also a pretty practical person, and I am aware that if I want to get a job here in the US, I will probably be studying Native American history. So I added a minor in Native American Studies, which is where a lot of this information came from. Also a minor in English, and you know what? That turned out to be the most useful because here I am working in a library. And I started out doing a lot of the research that ended up in this presentation because I was supposed to help at an archaeological dig at Fort Biatanon, which if any of you don't know, that is up south of West Lafayette, so not too far away from here. And it's one of the first French fur trading sites where they interacted with the Native Americans in the area. So it was going to be a really cool excavation. However, COVID-19 happened, so that never panned out, but it did give me a lot of the start to the research that you're going to see today. And so let's get started. I think the best place to start would be at the beginning. So we'll start with how people made it to America in the first place. So when you were in school, you probably learned something about the Siberian land bridge, or Beringia, and probably learned that people walked across this to get to the United States about 13,500 years ago. But that's actually not the main theory anymore about how people came to America. So the reason for this is that there's a site in Chile called Monteverde, and it was found in 1997, and they found that the site was 14,500 years old, which was significantly older than when they thought people would have come across that Beringia land bridge, and people had to make it all the way down to Monteverde, Chile, which if you see in this map, it's pretty far down there, so people aren't going to be walking that distance in even probably a couple hundred years as they slowly migrate. And there'd been other older sites before this. People all over the United States have been finding sites that they said, hey, this is older than we think people came across this land bridge. But there was always some reason to discredit them. People would say, oh hey, you could have dated this wrong. Oh, you could have been looking at the wrong layer here. And so the archaeologist who was digging in Chile was very smart about it. He knew what he was about to find, so he called some other archaeologists and actually paid to fly them to Chile, some of the top archaeologists in the world, to watch him uncover this site and show that he did everything correctly. So it kind of blew up in the world of archaeology, and we needed a new theory about how people got to the United States. And so the new theory is called coastal migration. However, even more recently, we have found that there are genetic links between the people who did cross the Beringia land bridge and the Native Americans who are around today. So that is still a way that people made it into the United States originally. However, they weren't the first. Because there was this giant ice sheet covering Alaska, and we know people couldn't have gotten south of that by walking until about 13,000 years ago. So we still need another explanation, and thus you get the most recent theory, which is coastal migration. Basically, this is the idea that people came around the coast from the area of Beringia on boats and followed the coastline of the United States all the way down from Alaska to Chile. and they probably were following this kelp highway, is what we call it in archaeology. But there was probably this ecosystem along the coast based around these kelp forests that was really lush, lots of plants and animals that they were following and hunting, which would make sense why they would move along this all the way down to Chile. This is kind of a hard theory to look into, unfortunately, because since sea levels have risen, and that's why we no longer have a land bridge between us and Russia, a lot of these sites that we would find, that you would expect to find along the coast, are now underwater. However, archaeology gets better every day, and we find more sites under the water, and our tools for doing that become better. So that's, there's way more about this theory to be found in the future. But, however, Monteverde is back again. Even more recently, they found a lower layer at this site that is 18,500 years old. So it once again brings into question, when did people get here? Did they cross this land bridge? Did these people maybe follow the coast all the way from somewhere like Japan? And we're starting to find some genetic evidence of that maybe. So it's a whole new theory, or do we need to change the theory we have? So it's still in flux. It's a great example of how history is not as stagnant as we think it is. It's always changing. And so this is an area of research that's really being looked into right now and always changing. In fact, one of the archaeologists at Monteverde claims that they found something at the site that is 33,200 years old. It's a piece of wood that was burned, and they've radiocarbon dated it to that time period. However, the other archaeologists at the site, they're real cautious about this date. It hasn't been verified. It's not something the whole community, archaeological community, believes. There are other reasons that wood could have burned in this area, lightning strikes, that sort of thing. But, if this date was accurate, it would completely rewrite not just American history, but really world history, because that's about the time period that people are even moving into Asia for the first time. So it would really change a lot about archaeology if this date was accurate. But once again, it's not really a believed date yet. We'd have to find a lot more concurrent sites for that even to be a possibility. But it is interesting to note that it could be even older than we think. So zooming in a little more, we'll focus specifically on our topic today, which is Indiana, which obviously, if you haven't picked up on it, is Land of the Indians is what the name means. So you'd expect there to be a lot of Native American history here. One of the reasons for the name is most likely that when settlers first showed up here, they asked the Native Americans who were living here, hey, what is this place called? And probably what they heard were these two words here on the screen, which I won't try to pronounce because they're from the Miami language, and I don't have the first clue how you pronounce that correctly. But most likely the Miami answered either their word for place of the Miami or place of the people. And so you can see how a European would hear that and hear, oh, this is the place of the Indians, thus we get Land of the Indians. So it's most likely a Native American, an English adaptation of a Native American name for Indiana, which is really interesting because we are one of the only states like that, really. There's a lot of states that are directly the word that a Native American tribe used, but we're the only one, really, that I know of at least, where it's the Native American word but kind of translated into English like that. So it's actually a very interesting name in the context of this presentation. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. This is kind of the time period. I'm going to start with the Paleoindian, which is the earliest occupation, the earliest time humans are in Indiana, all the way through to the Protohistoric, which is right when you get the first influences of European colonization. So not necessarily when Europeans are making their way to Indiana, but when you start to see European influences, so different tools and things that they're bringing brought into the communities in Indiana. And that's where I'm stopping today. I'm not going to go into the historical period just because this is the area that I focus on and that I'm interested in. Maybe if that's something people are interested in, we could do another video if people want that, but this is what I'm interested in, so I wanted to really focus in on that. I also like to point out here you can see how both the Archaic and the Woodland periods have multiple sub-periods, and that's just because they span so much time and so many things change during that time that they can be broken down in these little subgroups. So we'll go into that a little more and go into each of those when we describe them. So we'll start with the Paleoindian period. This is when people first enter Indiana. It's as the Wisconsin Glacier begins to retreat sometime between 12,000 and 14,000 years ago. People move in as soon as the land becomes habitable, and they follow the animals right in. So generally these people are thought to be small family bands wandering over this large territory, following large game like caribou. So we think mainly big game hunters, very, very small families. The main thing that we know about them is that they have these fluted spear points. That's really how we recognize them in archaeology, is they have these very distinct spear points that they're using and that we find. These kind of points are found all over Indiana, and we'll look at some pictures of them in a second. And we see them everywhere. You're not going to find a ton. They're very low density, so one in one county, one in another county, but they have been found pretty much everywhere. So we know these people are all over at this time. And that's important to know because we have not found in Indiana any in situ sites, which means we don't have, a village or a place where people have set down because they're leaving such little trace on the land. We only have these spear points at the moment. The one other impact they do have that we've noticed on the land in Indiana is the shell middens that we find along the Ohio River. So over here on the right, this image, you can see this is what a shell midden would look like in the East Coast. I couldn't find any pictures specifically from Indiana, but this is what it would look like if you were to find it along the Ohio River. And midden is basically just the archaeological word for trash heap, which may sound really disgusting or very lame, but in archaeology, basically the best thing you can find is a trash heap. Because what people are throwing away tells you so much about their lives, what they're eating, what they're doing with their tools. So we know so much about these mussels and that they're eating these mussels from these middens. It's very interesting. In fact, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole when researching because I hadn't seen mussels like this around anywhere living here in Indiana, and I found out that they've actually almost entirely gone extinct because we've raised the water levels and have so much pollution that these mussels, which were so abundant at the time that we get these giant hills of mussel shells of people eating them, are almost entirely extinct now. So I just found that a bit of a tangent, but fascinating. So something we're going to talk about a lot in this presentation is points. And I think that's because as an archaeologist they're really, really important, but also because the one thing I always hear when I tell people that I'm an archaeologist around here is, oh, I found an arrowhead. I found an arrowhead out in my field, my grandpa's field, my uncle's field, whoever. So people always seem to have some interest in that, like a personal interest. So I wanted to kind of focus on that a little bit during this presentation. And to point out that basically the majority of points you find, projectile points is what we call them in archaeology, are not actually going to be arrowheads. Nothing on this screen is an arrowhead because the bow and arrow is not introduced into Indiana until very, very late. So it's basically all spear points for the majority of Indiana history. All of these would have been on spears. So you can see fluted, if you can see on that second point, the gamey point, there's a bit of a ridge at the bottom where it would have been stuck onto a stick to make the spear. That is what that is, and how you distinguish these. Clovis is probably the most famous. That's what was thought to be the earliest spear point in America before we discovered the new route of entry, and that people didn't first come over the land bridge. So that one's kind of, if you've heard of a spear point, it's probably going to be Clovis because it's the most famous. But yeah, these are, if you see one of these, you know that you're talking about the Paleoindian period. And the reason that these points are so important to archaeologists, I like to compare them to cell phones. They make things very easy to date because they're a technology that people are using and they change very dramatically over time. And it's something that in general people adopt very quickly. So once a new technology that's slightly better comes along, everybody switches to that new technology. And so if you see, if you were to see a phone from the mid-90s, you'd know it was a phone from the mid-90s. You wouldn't think, oh, that could be from, 2010. Like, there's a very distinct change over time in how our phones look. And someone might still use a phone from, 5 to 10 years ago, but no one's going to be using a phone really from any time before that. Like, it's a very distinct change in technology. And that's exactly what these spear points are over a much larger period of time. So one of the best things that American archaeologists can find is a very distinct spear point because they know exactly what time period you're talking about. So the next we get into the Archaic with the early Archaic. 8,000 to 6,000 BCE, which, by the way, CE is just the kind of a new way of saying BC, and then CE itself is the new version of saying AD. It's before current era and current era. It's just a slightly more scientific term that most historians and archaeologists have been picking up recently. And so the Archaic changes a little bit in the environment. It's becoming more similar to what we have today, so you'd kind of recognize, if you went back in time in a time machine, it would look like the natural parts of Indiana today, whereas before, in the Paleoindian, it was more sparse because these glaciers had just gone out. There weren't great forests. It was a lot colder. So this is starting to be a time period that we'd recognize the environment. People are still very nomadic. They're seasonally using resources. So they're, you go to one part of the state or one part of the area when there's this berry you want to harvest, or you follow this animal at this part of the year. It's still very nomadic. But we get a lot of new types of tools. People are using tools for, more woodworking tools, that kind of thing. They're getting more complicated, more than just spear points that we find. And the spear points themselves are changing. So we get new hafting techniques, how you put it on the stick, that's what hafting is. And we get bifurcated bases, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. We also find these grinding and pitting stones, which you can see over here on the right, and that tells us that they are processing plant resources pretty intensely. So, nuts, different natural grains, they're processing, they're cooking, they're using what's around them very intensely. We also have some sites here in Indiana. Burials are very rare from this time period, but we do have one in Davis County called the Jerger site. And I found this site really cool because what they found there in one of these burials are these shells. And these shells are only found in Florida and the West Indies. So even at this early point, when people are mainly hunters and gatherers, there's some kind of trade system going on. Someone in Indiana has decorative shells that came from Florida. And it's not like it's a useful tool that you'd want to trade for. It's people are trading to get some sort of luxury item that came all the way from Florida or even further away, which is very interesting. We also have the Swan's Landing site from this time period in Harrison County. And at this site, it was where people were producing stone tools. So it's almost like a factory. Like, people would take time out of their yearly cycle to go there, use the stone that's there, and make tools. And it's one of the most important sites from this time period in all of North America. So it's very cool that that's here in Indiana. But unfortunately, people figured out that it was an important site and that they could find arrowheads and stuff there. And people actually came in and used high-pressure hoses to wash off the soil and try to find these arrowheads that were there. Or not arrowheads, projectile points, because they wouldn't have been for bow and arrow, like I said. But, people were absolutely destroying what's one of the most important sites so that they could get to these points. So that's definitely something that makes an archaeologist sad. It's the kind of thing that we hate to hear, because as soon as something like that is done, or an artifact like that's taken out of the context, then it loses all the information that we could have gotten as archaeologists from it. So looting is bad. If you ever know someone that does that kind of thing, please let someone know. But yeah, that's a very cool site that's here in Indiana. Oh, and I wanted to point out, because like I said, I've worked in Ireland and I'm very interested in Irish history. I discovered that people did not make their way to Ireland until about 7,000 to 6,500 BCE, which is considerably later than they made it to America. And I knew that blew my mind, because I think we have this concept of places like Ireland and England as being these really, really old countries with a deep, rich history. But people have been in America for almost 10,000 years longer than they've been in somewhere like Ireland. So it's not as much of a new world as we'd like to think. It's actually one of the older parts of the world. So here are the points that you get for the early Archaic. So you can see how these at the bottom of them, they have these two little notches into them. That's what we're talking about with bifurcated bases. So it's a very big technological change that is adapted pretty much everywhere across the United States. You'll also notice that the one is marked as Miami County, Indiana. I tried to get as many of these pictures, examples of these types from that were found in Indiana as possible. So most of these are ones that were found in Indiana, which is very cool. Right, then we get to the Middle Archaic. Unfortunately, in Indiana, it's not been super well studied. We don't have a lot of sites, not a lot of research has been done, so there's not much we can say specifically about Indiana. What we do know is we get more groundstone tools appearing. That's what you see over here, this axe. So you literally take a rock and you grind it down until you get the tool that you want. People are using that for axes like we see here, or spear thrower weights, which is, people use a device called an atlatl, which is one of my favorite words, but basically you put a spear into it and it's like a big stick that allows you to extend your arm and throw the spear even further, and you have to weight it just right for your spear. So we see weights that people were using for that, which is a pretty cool technological advance that people made. And we also see that settlements are lasting longer. So people are staying in one place longer, they're not moving around the landscape quite as much, which is interesting. But like I said, more research to be done there. And these are the points for that site. I will say I'm not showing you every possible point you could find for any of these sites. These are examples of what, if you find this, you know that it's definitely from this period. So those top four are specifically from the Middle Archaic, and then on the bottom two, the Karnak and the Matanzas, those are both also found into the beginning of the Late Archaic. And so that brings us to the Late Archaic. It's when we begin to see distinguishable cultures, and what that means is people in one part of the state are doing something different from another part of the state. They really see themselves as us, and other groups as them. You get kind of an identity, or at least we're seeing that through the material culture they leave behind. So this group here uses one kind of spear point, but this group uses a totally different type of spear point. There's some sort of distinguishable difference and locational range to these tools, so we call them cultures. In Indiana at this time period, we have the French Lick culture, the Bluegrass culture, the Glacial Cames culture, the early Red Ochre culture, and the Manacle Creek culture. And this time period, this is when tool types increase exponentially. We get so many different tool types. We see a lot of things for woodworking and food processing, lots of new tools. We also find a lot more ornamentations. People are making things to decorate themselves with. We see shells and pearls, copper ornaments. People are, at least we're finding artifacts that show that they are spending more time on their look. It is possible we're just not finding these things and they use them in earlier time periods, but we're definitely finding them in the Late Archaic. And people are having these large semi-permanent settlements. They are, some part of the group is either staying in the place year-round, or they have multiple places they stay throughout the year, but they have really set settlements. And this is also the first time we see mounds being used, which mounds are a big part of the Native American culture in Indiana. We see them in lots of different places, but this is the first time that people have started building them. And so here we have the McCain site, and it's very interesting because it provided a lot of information on what people are eating. It's also a village, and we see some of the burial practices there, so it's just an all-around great site. It has kind of all the interesting areas. Then we have the McKinley site, which is another example of a very large village. And then I wanted to, I couldn't find any great pictures of Indiana from this time period, but one of my favorite sites in the U.S. is from the Late Archaic, and that is Pottery Point in Louisiana. And what's really interesting is it's this very large-scale, it's large-scale earthworks. We think there was a village there. And what's really interesting about that is it's one of the largest monuments built by people who weren't practicing agriculture at the time. Most giant architecture you can think of, other than maybe Göbekli Tepe, is the only one else I can think of, which is a site in Turkey. Basically every large site you think of, the people had agriculture before they built that site. And here they didn't. They were hunter-gatherers, but they still have this large village with these large earthworks. So it kind of changes how we think about the capabilities of people who don't have agriculture. If you're in an area that's very rich and abundant, you don't necessarily need agriculture to have a large-scale community. You just need enough in the environment to support you. So it kind of changed the way archaeologists thought about hunter-gatherers and what they're capable of. So it's just a very, very cool site. These are the points. Like I said before, those first two, the Matanzas and the Karnak, also are in the Middle Archaic, but the other two are very distinct to this period. Then you get to the terminal Late Archaic, which actually I'll admit I did not know much about. It seems to be very unique to Indiana as a time period. so I hadn't learned a lot about it before I was researching for this. And it's kind of this transitional period between the late Archaic and the early Woodland, and you might see why when we get to the next slide, why this could be a culture that has a lot of the traits of the early Woodland, but not technically be considered Woodland. It's mainly represented by the Riverton culture, and they have these very, very small projectile points. So if you see over here on the right, they're all basically less than an inch. So they're using these tiny, tiny little points. And they're still spear points. So it's, you can imagine this tiny little point on a large spear. So it's very interesting that they're using that. And they're basically found on all the major rivers here in the south of Indiana, which is why they're called Riverton. So the lower Wabash, the Ohio, the White River, so they definitely would have been in the area of Crawfordsville at this time. There's a lot of sites around here having to do with it. The Wentz site, which had lots of different features, pit features, middens, so a trash heap, lots of lithics. Lithics means stone tools like these we see here, and house structures there. We also have a site in Dearborn County and a site in Tippecanoe County that kind of show how large their range was. And then we get to the early Woodland. The big deal of what makes something a woodland site is pottery, which is great. I think pottery is way more interesting than spear points, so it is great that we have pottery now. And it's a big cultural shift, and that's why it becomes the woodlands period. People in this period are also starting to select plants, and so what that means is they're thinking along the lines of, if I want a bigger gourd, I should plant the seeds of a bigger gourd. It's not quite agriculture yet, but people are starting this process of domestication, and they're changing the way these plants grow to suit their needs, which is very cool. There are two very distinct culture groups in Indiana at this time. The Adena, who we know they're Adena by the fact that they have burial mounds with log tombs and grave goods, and the crab orchard culture, which they have a very distinct pottery where they impress fabric into the ceramics to give it a very unique texture. One site of them in Indiana is the Nolan Mound in Dearborn County, and it's an example of one of these burial mounds with the log tombs of the Adena culture. And probably the most famous site from this time period is Mound State Park in Anderson. The Great Mound there is believed to have been constructed about 160 BC, so actually right after the end of the early woodlands, but there's multiple mounds there, and some of them were built before, so during the early woodlands. So it's a site that was used in both the early and middle woodlands. And the surveys there indicate that the mound was used as a place for people to gather for religious ceremonies, and it also marks astronomical alignments, which is interesting. I actually got to go and check it out during the equinox last summer. However, unfortunately, if you can see in the picture over there on the right, there's lots of trees, and the trees block the sun, so you actually can't see it when it sets and what part of the mound it sets over, which is kind of disappointing. But it would have, at the time these people were there, they would have been marking the equinoxes and the solstice at the site. And so that picture on the bottom there on the right is an artist's interpretation of what one of these religious ceremonies at the mounds would have looked like, which is pretty cool. So, in addition to points, we now have pottery, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of great pictures for the cultures in Indiana and their pottery. So, you can kind of see the cord mark pottery down there from the Hoosier National Forest, where these were found. But it's not a great picture. But still, you can see it's a new thing that we can use to date and also find different cultures. Different cultures are doing different things with their pottery. So then we get to the middle woodlands, and this is when culture becomes very rich and complex. We get a lot of new cultural traits, new skills, lots of cool stuff going on. We see lots of evidence of large trade routes. People all over the United States are trading with each other and for all kinds of different things, which is very cool. We see these mounds like the one in Anderson that have the astronomical alignment, so people are marking the time of year and trying to keep track of the dates. And probably the reason for this is that we see the beginning of horticulture or agriculture. People are farming not what you'd expect. It's a couple plants called goosefruit, marsh elder, and sunflowers, which you might have expected, but these are things that were native to Indiana originally, and they've been domesticated at this time period, and people are starting to grow them agriculturally, which is why they might have been, we need to know at what time to plant this, so we need some form of calendar by watching the sun. That's why you might get more astronomical alignment stuff at this time period. And we have a very, very cool middle woodland site in Indiana called the Man Site. It's a very elaborate earthwork site and village complex. It had artifacts from as far away as Georgia from the Gulf Coast, and it is one of the largest and most important sites in the eastern United States from this time period. These pictures over here on the right are all artifacts that were found at this site. So at the top there, that is a pipe that's supposed to look like a jaguar. Next to it you have some grizzly bear claws, which is really interesting because grizzly bears are actually not native to Indiana, so it's another example of trade. And then on the bottom left there, that is a figurine, and they found almost 400 pieces of these figurines, and it may look like they're broken, but actually what they do is there's little holes where they would have put some sort of sinew or something through it, and you could actually attach different pieces to each other. So it's almost like a doll where you can change out the outfit or the head or the arms for whatever you're doing. So probably for a ceremonial purpose, but we don't really know. And then right there you just have some more examples of the kind of pottery statues that they had there, which is very interesting. Another pretty big site from this period in Indiana is the Goodall site in LaPorte County, which is 22 mounds, and it's a slightly different culture up north where they have lots of smaller mounds all grouped together. So you can see there's way more pottery during this time period. Each of these at the bottom there, the Havana, the Mun, the Lake Crab Orchard, and the Allison Lamont, are all different cultural groups that are all doing slightly different things with their pottery. Which is, once again, kind of hard to see because these aren't great pictures, but you can see that people are using pottery a lot, and they're doing different things with it in different parts of the state, which is very cool. So we get to the late woodland, and finally we get the introduction of the bow and arrow. So everything up to this point, it has not been arrowheads, it's been all spear points. And now what you'll start to see from here on out, they're still using spear points, but they're using the same designs for their bow and arrows. This is also when we see intense agriculture start, kind of the traditional agriculture you think of when you think of North America and the Native American population. It's corn, bean, and squash, the three sisters they're called. We also see that this time sites become smaller, smaller towns, smaller villages, unless they're more spread out. And people slow down with the mound building. They're not building nearly as many mounds, which is very interesting because kind of our traditional view is you expect when people start to have agriculture that they would build more things. But in a lot of cases when you first start with agriculture, it's harder than being hunter-gatherers because it takes more time, it's more strenuous on the body. So it's actually kind of the opposite of what you think. Agriculture can actually do something like we see here where sites can become smaller and their smaller groups can be sustained in one place because you have to have room for your agriculture. There's a lot of different cultures at this time period. I've listed most of them here. I was hoping to find a good map, but one doesn't seem to exist, so I tried to tell you which part of the state they're in, by northwest, central, southwest. But they're all over, lots of different groups at this time period. The couple sites from this time period, you get the Herscher site in Henry County, which is interesting because you have both human and dog burials there. So people definitely were revering their dogs and cared about their dogs like family members at this time, which is very cool to see. And then you also get the Morrell Sheets site, which is right here in Montgomery County. And what this site tells us about the people living here at the time is that they were eating deer, turtle, beaver, elk, small mammals, and more of those mussels still. It also appears that they had been living there at different parts of the year during the warmest part of the year, so it was not a full-time settlement, it was just people at certain types of the year coming in to use the resources. So it's not like everyone everywhere has settled into a village. People are still moving around at different parts of the year to take advantage of the resources that are here. And I tried to figure out where this was since it's right here in Montgomery County, and all I could find was they found it when they were going to build bridge number 88, and I tried to figure out where that was, but I could not find any details. So if anyone knows where bridge 88 is, I would love to know where they found this village at. And so these are the different points and pottery and all that. We also get tools. We find a lot of hoes from this time period because they are starting to do traditional agriculture, so you need hoes to predict the soil. And if you can see up there on the left side, the left top point, is the Madison point, and that is what the first arrowheads look like. When they first start making arrowheads, they're just a very simple triangle, which is interesting because they do have, the bifurcated bases, like the Racoon Creek one you see next to it, but they start out not with the traditional shape that we think of as an arrowhead, but just straight up triangle, which is very interesting. Then we get to the Mississippian time period, which is probably my favorite, because the sites get very, very complex. So a classic Mississippian site has platform mounds, which you can see an example of over on the right, those mounds with the flat top. There's spaces, there's public and ceremonial spaces, like plazas. It's a nucleated village with nearby hamlets and farmsteads. So there's a main urban hub and then farms that support it. People are building palisades around their town, so you can see on the top picture there that there's a wall around the city. They have set cemeteries, very intensive agriculture, and a stratified social organization, which means there's different classes. There's an upper class, there's a middle class, there's a lower class, probably also some sort of like a religious or priest class. So it's all of this, to me, it seems very similar to European culture at the time, because if you think about it, this is the Middle Ages. So it's very, very similar, really. Their ceramics get very interesting this time. The pottery gets very cool, very decorative. We'll see an example on the next slide. They become very artistic about it. And we have a very famous site for this in Indiana called Angel Mounds, just down in Evansville. And it was a town with flat-top mounds and a large plaza with nearby farming community. So a lot of the hallmarks of a classic Mississippian site. And that's what you're seeing over here on the right. These pictures are of Angel Mounds, which you can go and visit. It's a state historical site. So they've got a museum there and lots of cool stuff to check out. So highly recommend it if you're looking for a cool historical trip. But I wanted to talk about a site from the Mississippian culture called Cahokia. It's not actually in Indiana, it's in Illinois. It's right across the river from St. Louis. But it is kind of the central hub of all of Mississippian culture. It's very, very cool. It's the largest city, the most influential, very important to this culture. It hit its height around 1100 CE, or AD if you prefer. It covered about 6 square miles and included about 120 mounds. And they were in all kinds of sizes and shapes. So it's a very, very big site. And at the top of its population, it may have briefly exceeded London at the time. So medieval London was probably smaller than this city. At 14,000 to 18,000 people. And in fact, I was really interested in this fact, so I looked it up. And based on the largest population estimates that archaeologists have given for this site, it actually would have been the 8th largest city in Europe at the time if it had been located in Europe. So personally, I think that's really interesting because people always seem to think of Native Americans as, these people living in teepees, they don't stay in one place very long, but they've got similar things going on to what's going on in Europe. They're not this, completely mobile community like we like to think. They have complex cities with as many people as London. And Cahokia Mounds is in fact considered the largest and most complex archaeological site outside of Mexico, or north of Mexico, because that's where you get, Aztec culture at this time. But yeah, they're building these large mounds. And you can still go visit Cahokia today. You can see there on the bottom, that's what the mound looks like. The big mound looks like today. Monk's Mound, they call it. And you can walk up it, and apparently the view is really good. You can see St. Louis from there. And I also like to draw your attention to this little statue down here in the corner. He is a chunky player. And I think he is very cool because it is a sports game that they played, some sort of athletic event that they had. And there are plazas in all of the Mississippian villages to play this game in. And in fact, this little statue was believed to have been made in Cahokia, but they actually found it all the way in Arizona. So people in Arizona even know about this game and how people are playing this game in Illinois. So I like to imagine that it's kind of like modern basketball, and, you know, all over the United States, you know. So a team from Cahokia is playing a team from Arizona, and I don't know if that's true, if we have any evidence of that, but I like to imagine that there's this national sports league going on at this time. And in fact, these games are very similar to the ones we see played by the Aztecs down in Mexico at this time. So there's kind of really some sort of universal sports event happening, which is very cool. So here we see the tools. Cahokia has a very distinct spear point associated with it that you can see on the left there with these little notches, which looks pretty nasty. You would not want to get stabbed by that. We also see the shape of the hose changing, so we get kind of a distinct hose shape in this period. And then we have the pottery here, the effigy pottery. You can see it's very detailed. They made it look like people and plants and all kinds of, sorry, not plants, people and animals, and all kinds of cool stuff. They're also doing something called shell tempering, which basically tempering is when you add something to your pottery to make it stronger, generally something like sand or shell in this case. So they're understanding the technology of pottery even better. You also get handles on the pottery, which may sound like obvious, like why wouldn't you add handles, but they can be surprisingly difficult to do because it's this little piece and it heats up faster than the rest of what you're making, or at a different temperature from the rest of what you're making, so it's very easy for handles to just break off. So it's actually a very advanced technology. So we start to see it in this time period. Salt pans, basically you have to have salt to survive. So they'd go to the salt marshes and put water onto these giant pans. This is only part of one here, and it would evaporate, and that's how they'd get their salt. So that's distinct to this time period. And ladles apparently are distinct to this time period, which I didn't know about, but if you find a ladle, it's probably Mississippian. So then you get into the protohistoric, and basically what that means is these are the cultures that thought to become the groups that are met by Europeans when they first get to the area of Indiana. So, you know, how do we get from the Mississippians to people like the Miami who are here when French fur traders show up? And in a perfect world, an archaeologist would want to find an undisturbed site with prehistoric, so meaning anything before the protohistoric, anything we've talked about today. You want to find a site that has that, and then on top of it has a historic layer of artifacts. That way you can see, oh hey, we recognize this sphere point as this culture, and on top of it we have something that we recognize as, you know, Miami, therefore we know that this group becomes the Miami. However, in Indiana, what happened is out east when the Europeans show up, they fight with the Iroquois and interact with the Iroquois and start something called the Iroquois War. And they push west, which pushes a lot of the groups that were in Indiana at the time off of their land. They eventually, most of them come back, but we have this break in the historic record where we don't find these layers on top of each other. So we don't really know which groups that exist in the protohistoric become the historic tribes that people are encountering when they get here, which is very interesting. So over here in the images you can see the one on the left is from the Indiana DNR's archaeology team of kind of where they believe the different tribes were originally. And then on the right you can see an image of how complicated this can be. This is a site that bases the ranges of different tribes on kind of historical documents, treaties, oral histories, all that kind of stuff. So you can see that all the different groups there are overlapping on each other. So it's not as clear-cut as the first image there would have you believe. There's a lot of overlapping claims and overlapping groups that share land or fight over land or what have you, but we don't really understand this super well in Indiana. I did want to zoom in on Crawfordsville, since that's probably where a lot of the people listening are from. And also because it's just a very interesting part of the state, because there's lots of interaction between tribes right in this little area. So you can see the different tribes who would have been around Crawfordsville at the time. Some that might surprise you, like the Sioux, who you might think of as a Great Plains group. You know, teepees and horses, which horses were not around at this time because they were bought by Europeans, or they would have just been showing up at this time. But the Sioux actually used to be in the area kind of Wisconsin and Illinois and eastern Indiana, and they actually get pushed west as Europeans come in and kind of adapt to the Great Plains culture that's already there. So they would have been kind of in this area, just barely into Indiana. We get the Potawatomi, the Kickapoo, the Miami. And these the names on the top are actually what these tribes call themselves, which is important to note because in a lot of cases the words that we use for tribes are actually insults, because European explorers would go to one tribe, befriend them, and then ask, hey, what's that tribe over there's name? And they would say, oh, we call them something like the enemy. And that's the term that people started using, but really a lot of them can be very offensive because it's some form of the enemy or that awful tribe, which is not great. So this is their spelling and their pronunciation of their tribes, which is pretty cool. But yeah, so this is the area around Crawfordsville. Protohistoric, basically you find the same kind of artifacts that we've been finding, spear points and all of that, but you also get the introduction of trade goods from Europeans. So you get green glass bottles and different kinds of copper alloy. So copper was being used before, but you see, a different European alloy of it. You get lead and iron, so it's just very stuff you'd recognize if you saw it as European. Gets introduced during this time period. So I actually wanted to jump back just a little bit, since that's kind of where I'm ending with the history of different Native American tribes in Indiana, but jump back a little bit to how Europeans discovered America, since that's kind of the ending, and it's something that has changed a little bit too. So when you were in school, you probably learned the rhyme. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue and discovered America. Well, it's not really true. First of all, just the term discovered rubs a lot of people the wrong way, because, Native American people discovered it 18,000 years ago. So it's not really a discovery if people have already found it, so that's not a great term. But also, Columbus was not the first European to come to America, in fact, and we'll get into that a little more in a minute. But I wanted to share some fun facts about Christopher Columbus, because, we spend at least one day a year celebrating him here in the U.S., and we named a lot of things after him. So I think it's important that people know that he wasn't the greatest person. In fact, he actually died believing he had accomplished his goal of reaching China and Japan, even though lots and lots of people told him that he had not. They thought he'd discovered some, island in the middle of the Atlantic, but they didn't realize how big it was. But he went to his deathbed saying, no, I made it to China, I was in China, even though lots of proof went against him. He also never set foot in North America, which is kind of a thing a lot of people don't realize or don't think about. He was mainly in the Caribbean, and he did, I believe it was Venezuela, so he did set foot in South America at one point, but he never made it into North America. He was also a pretty horrible person. He kidnapped and enslaved more than 1,000 people on Hispaniola, where he was governor. He publicly cut off Indians' ears to shock others into submission. Many girls and women were sold into sexual slavery under his control. Many were as young as 9 or 10. About 50,000 Indians committed mass suicide rather than comply with the Spanish under his rule in Hispaniola. And in fact, 56 years after he first made it there, only 500 out of 300,000 Indians remain on Hispaniola, which that is even a low number. It could have been as many as 500,000, really. So it's pretty much genocide. Like, it's not a great situation. He did a lot of horrible things, and a lot of things that I wasn't even comfortable sharing here because they're very, very graphic, and it's in his own words that they're recorded and the words of his biographer that he paid. So it's some pretty good sources about these horrible things that he did. And also, his job before he came to America was actually that he was a slave trader, and that's where he got his sailing experience. And so he kind of started the slave trade of bringing African slaves to the Americas, and then there ended up being a larger trade of taking slaves then up into North America. So a lot of people consider him the father of the transatlantic slave trade. So not quite the hero that you probably learned about in your elementary school history class. And he was not the first European to discover America. The first Europeans to get here were Vikings, which is pretty cool. So there'd always been these legends, sagas in Iceland that said that this guy named Leif Erikson made it to this new country, this new place called Vinland around AD 1000. And for a long, long time, it was considered only a myth. Everyone kind of blew it off as, you know, it's just a story and that he wasn't a real guy. But then in 1960, archaeologists discovered the remains of a Viking encampment in Canada, which they dated to around 1000 AD, or the time of Leif Erikson. And the site is called Lianzu Meadows. And it essentially proves that Vikings made it to America over 500 years before Columbus. So he wasn't even the first European to set foot in America, and these guys did make it to North America. They made it into Canada, and may have even traveled south on some expeditions. We're still looking for more evidence of that, but it seems like it was possible. We also know that the Vikings were interacting with the Inuit people, who you may have heard of Eskimo, but that is one of those examples of a very offensive term in an indigenous language, so they prefer Inuit. But Vikings were living on the island of Greenland for a long time, and so were the Inuit people. So there was trade going on there. They were very aware of these native people long before Columbus made it to America. So that's something that I think is very interesting. I think Vikings are very cool because, you know, I'm interested in medieval history. But they're the ones that the first Europeans to discover America. And that is a reproduction of what the site at Lianzu would have looked like. So this is a rebuilding of the archaeology that they found there, which I believe is a site you can just go and visit. It's very cool if you have a Canadian passport. So I wanted to just talk briefly about why all of this is important and why it's important to know the history of the people that live in Indiana. And one of the big things is that Native American people are still a very big part of American society today. I think we have this concept that they're dead and gone and not a part of our society today, but that's absolutely not true. An estimated 5.7 million Americans are Native American or Native Alaskan, and that's not even including Pacific Island culture in Hawaii, which is another indigenous culture that's a little different. Those numbers are probably actually pretty low because this is from the 2010 census, and the way that we account for Native American people in the census is actually changing because it wasn't a great system. So it's probably a much larger number than 5.7 million. And I think it's also important to recognize that many of the stereotypes that we have about Native Americans are either just completely untrue or based on a specific tribe that lived in a specific area. For example, everybody thinks of Native Americans having teepees and feather headdresses, but this is just a couple very specific tribes on the Great Plains, whereas probably 99% of Native Americans never used a teepee or a feather headdress. They're just completely unique to these tribes on the plains, so it can be very hurtful when someone just assumes that all Native American tribes use those things. It's also very interesting to note that even though Indiana is known as the land of the Indians, there are no federally recognized tribes here today. And that's kind of a legacy of the historic period and the fact that we basically kicked them all out and killed a lot of them. Most of the tribes were sent to Oklahoma during a Trail of Tears-esque removal. Today, the Pokagon Band of Potawatomis is based in Michigan, but they do have some land in Indiana. You also have the Miami tribe of Oklahoma, the descendants of those people who were kicked out, and they have been given a little bit of land here in Indiana so they can put a cultural extension office. That way tribe members can come and visit Indiana for traditional ritual activities. And then you also have the Miami Nation of Indiana, which is a group of Miami descendants who stayed in Indiana, and they're trying to become federally recognized as a tribe. And basically what federally recognized means is that you get recognition from the government that you and the people in your tribe are Native American, and you get support and the things that you were promised in your original treaties, the ability to do all kinds of things. So it's a very important distinction in our country to be federally recognized, but you have to have a lot of treaty documents and things to back it up, and in a lot of cases those have conveniently gone missing from government offices over the last 100 years. So that tribe is working very, very hard to try to get federally recognized. And if you're interested in any of these tribes, I highly recommend checking out their websites. They have a lot of good information about their history and what they're doing today as cultural groups. So highly recommend checking them out. And along with that kind of tangent, it's important to remember that a lot of the tribes are fighting for rights for things that they were originally promised. You know, when Americans came in and took their land, a lot of times promises made like, we'll provide health care and schooling for your children in exchange for this land, or, you know, we'll pay you this much money for this land, and none of that ever got delivered. So a lot of tribes are still actively fighting for things that they were promised, you know, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and they have the documents to back it up. So it's just an ongoing fight there. So knowing that history is important. And then I thought you could get away, you probably thought you could get away from COVID-19 by watching this presentation, but you can't. It's very, very interesting, or kind of awful right now, to see how badly COVID-19 is affecting the Native American tribes in this country. American Indian and Alaskan Native people are 5.3 times more likely than white people to be hospitalized due to COVID-19. And this is the largest disparity for any racial or ethnic group in the United States. Part of this is because there is a disproportionately high rate of pre-existing conditions. Another reason is that the Indian Health Service is chronically underfunded and under-resourced. In fact, in 2018, most of its hospitals reportedly were operating with fewer than 50 total beds each, while the agency had about 20% fewer doctors than was believed to be necessary. So it's just not, they do not have the resources to deal with a global pandemic like this. In fact, in May, Doctors Without Borders had to be deployed inside the United States for the first time ever when they were sent to the Navajo Nation. And the director of the Doctors Without Borders said that these tribes didn't have access to the variety of things that make it possible to self-isolate. You can't expect people to isolate if they have to drive 100 miles to get food and water. Basically, there's very few sources of resources on the reservations, so everyone has to go to the same 1 or 2 stores, and so the infection rate was just incredibly high. So not only are these people still around today, they're one of our most vulnerable populations. So just a couple maps here that kind of drive these last couple points home. On the left you see the states of the United States and provinces of Canada and the percentage of Native American people that live there. So you can see there's quite a few states where the number is quite high and lots of people, Native American people, live there. And once again, this is from the 2010 census, so the 2020 numbers will probably be quite a bit higher than this too. So you can see in Indiana it's quite low, because, as well as a lot of the East Coast, because people got pushed west. But a lot of states have a good percentage of the population that is Native American. And then on the right you can see this is federal reservation land, essentially land owned by Native American people and tribes. So you can see they're a big part of our landmass and a big part of our population. So it's very important to recognize that they're still an active part of American culture today. And that's pretty much it for the educational information, but I did want to share with you guys a couple really cool resources that I found while doing this research. The first one is projectilepoints.net. This is where I got a lot of the pictures of the projectile points, and it's great if you ever find what you think is an arrowhead or a spear point. You can go to their website and search. You can find Indiana. You can search by what kind of point it is. Does it have that bifurcated base? What does it look like? And then it gives you lots and lots of pictures, and you can narrow it down to the one you have and what time period it's from. So it's very useful. If you do ever find an arrowhead, if it's on your land, it is legally yours. You are allowed to keep it. However, archaeologists would love to know that you found it. Probably the best place to reach out to in Indiana would be the DNR has an archaeology department. And please, if you find one, the more information you can tell someone about where you found it, the better. Just because the moment it gets taken out of context, it basically, once you've removed it from that field where you found it, it doesn't help us find anything else. So if you found one that's from, the Paleoindian and it's 10,000 years old, but you take it home and don't remember where you found it, then that's, a great piece of history that we've lost the information on. So if you find something, please let someone know. The archaeological community would really appreciate it. Then you also have this site that I love, nativeland.ca, which that map I showed you of Crawfordsville with all the different tribes on it, that's from their website. Basically, you can zoom into any point in the United States. Now, and also they have Australia and a couple other countries with indigenous populations. And you can see, look up your address and see these are all the tribes that would have lived in this area at the point of contact. And they're adding all kinds of new functions, so now I believe just recently they've added languages. so you can see the languages that people would have spoken in the area where you live. It's a very, very fun website to play with, very educational. And then lastly, this Early Peoples of Indiana book that the Indiana DNR created. It's free. It's on their website. If you go to www.in.gov/DNR, they'll have a tab on the side that says Publications and Maps, and then they'll have under Brochures, Early Peoples of Indiana. And it is where I got the starting point for a lot of the research I did. It's a really great resource specifically about Indiana if this interests you, because honestly there's not a lot of great books about the Native American populations in Indiana, so this is definitely something to look into. That's a free resource if this stuff interests you, and they get very deep into the archaeology and the projectile points. It's very good. Lastly, if you want more information or you're interested in Native American culture or history, Shelby, my coworker, set up this great display, and I helped pick a couple new books for it. It's upstairs on our second floor here at the library, and we have all kinds of cool books. There's fiction, there's non-fiction, there's teen books, YA books, and movies. So if you're interested in any way in Native American culture, come check this out. We've got all kinds of good books that'll be here through the end of the month for you to check out that I highly recommend, because there's some really good ones on there. And I wouldn't be a good librarian if I didn't tell you to come into the library and pick up a book. Alright, thank you guys so much. I hope that you learned a lot and got a lot out of this. I'll open up the chat now for questions, and I'll go back through and see if there's any questions I missed while I was talking. But I've also put my email at the library up there, and our general ask email. So if you guys have questions you think of, later tonight or at some point, you can email either one of those, and I'll try to find out more information for you. So alright, I'll go and check the chat. Well, somebody said they like the Ireland fact. I'm really glad, because I debated about putting it in there, but it blew my mind, so I hoped it would blow some other people's minds. So yeah, I'll give it a couple minutes if anyone wants to throw any questions in. If not, I believe this presentation, we're going to put it up online later. If there's ever anything you want to go back to, or if you want these emails. So Tim, that's very interesting. Because those late archaic sites, I love them. They're very cool. And that shows there's so much interesting history around here that I think we don't always learn about. I don't think we learned a lot about this when I was in school, or how rich the culture was around here. But you find these super points all over, which is very cool. Alrighty guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I'll go ahead and leave you all to it, but thank you guys all so much for coming. Like I said, if you've got more questions, or you were still typing something and didn't get it in time, feel free to reach out to either of those emails, and I'll try to get back to you. But thank you all so much for watching. Hope you all enjoyed it.